The thunder cracked like a bullwhip across the Montana sky as Katherine Keller clutched her father's pocket watch, the last memento of a man 6 months dead, while her small mercantile store crumbled around her not from the storm, but from the weight of unpayable debts and broken dreams. The year was 1876, and Catherine Katy, to those who knew her heart, had inherited not only her father's stubborn determination, but also his failing business on the dusty main street of Promise Creek, a town whose name felt more like mockery than hope these days. The rain hammered against the wooden awning as Catherine turned the open sign to closed, though it hardly mattered anymore. The bank would be taking everything by week's end. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the shop window, watching rivulets of water race down like the tears she refused to shed. "Might want to step back from that window, madam." The deep voice startled her, and Catherine whirled around to find a tall figure silhouetted in the doorway she'd forgotten to lock. Water dripped from the brim of his hat onto the floorboards, creating tiny puddles at his boots. "We're closed," she said, her voice steadier than her nerves. The man stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind, eyes the color of the big sky after a storm. "Weston Yancy," he said simply. "Folks call me West." "I don't care what folks call you, Mr. Yancy, the store is closed." A faint smile crossed his face as he glanced around at the half-empty shelves. "Appears to be more than just closed for the day," Catherine bristled. "My business affairs are none of your concern." "Maybe not," he conceded. "But when Hiram Wells is about to seize a property that sits on land worth 10 times what he's claiming in debts, it becomes the concern of anyone with a sense of fairness." Her eyes narrowed. "How do you know about my arrangement with the bank? Small towns have big ears, Miss Keller." "Katherine Keller," West nodded, water still dripping from his duster. "Miss Keller, I have a proposition for you." Catherine let out a bitter laugh. "I've had enough propositions from men thinking they can swoop in and save the poor widow's daughter. What makes yours any different?" "For one, I'm not looking to court you," he said bluntly. "And for another, I know what Hiram Wells is planning for this whole stretch of road once he takes your store." "And what's that?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her, railroads coming through. "Wells has been buying up everything he can for months, using the bank to do his dirty work. Your father never would have sold to him, would he?" Catherine felt the truth of his words like a physical blow. "No, he wouldn't." She studied the stranger more carefully. His clothes were plain but well kept, his stance confident without being imposing. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Yancy?" "A partnership," he said, stepping closer. "I've got the money to pay off your debt to the bank. You've got the store and the knowledge to run it. Together, we could make this place what your father always wanted it to be." "And why would you do that? What's in it for you?" 30% of the profits and a chance to see Hiram Wells's face when he realizes his plan has fallen apart. There was something in his eyes then, something that spoke of old grudges and personal vendettas. Catherine shook her head. "You don't know me. You don't know this business. We're not worth the risk you're taking." West looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Then you don't know what worth is yet, Miss Keller." The words hung between them as the storm raged outside, and for the first time in months, Catherine felt something other than despair stirring in her chest. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world and a contract signed in the early hours by lamplight. Catherine had insisted on detailed terms, much to West's apparent amusement. He'd produced the money as promised, a canvas bag of gold eagles that made her hands shake when she counted it. "Where does a cowboy get this kind of money?" she'd asked suspiciously. "Who said I was just a cowboy?" He'd replied with that same hint of a smile. Now, as Catherine swept the boardwalk in front of Keller's mercantile, she watched West emerge from the bank across the street. His long strides ate up the distance between them, and she could tell from his expression that the meeting with Hiram Wells had gone exactly as planned. "It's done," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Debts paid, stores secure." And Wells, let's just say he looked like he'd swallowed something considerably more bitter than his morning coffee. West's satisfaction was palpable. He tried to refuse the payment. On what grounds? None he could admit to. I reminded him that refusing valid payment on a legitimate debt might interest the banking commission in Helena. West leaned against the storefront. He took the money. Katherine nodded, relief warring with apprehension. So we're partners now. We are. I still don't understand why you're doing this. West's face turned serious. Let's get one thing straight, Miss Keller. I don't make charity investments. I believe this store can be profitable again, especially with what's coming to Promise Creek. And what exactly is coming? Change, he said simply. The kind that makes some people rich and others wish they'd seen it coming. Katherine studied him. In the clear light of morning, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 to her 24. His eyes were indeed the color of the Montana sky, but there was something in them that spoke of hard lessons learned. You've been in Promise Creek before, she said, a statement rather than a question. A lifetime ago, he admitted. Things change, people change. Before she could press further, the stagecoach rumbled into town, drawing their attention to the cloud of dust rising on the eastern road. West straightened, his hand briefly touching the revolver at his hip in a gesture so natural it might have been unconscious. Expecting trouble. Katherine asked. Always, he replied, but his hand dropped away as the stage pulled up to the hotel down the street. First order of business is inventory. Let's see what we're working with. Inside the store, Katherine watched as West methodically examined the shelves, checking ledgers against stock, asking pointed questions about suppliers and shipping costs. His knowledge of business surprised her. My father taught me everything about running this place, she said as they worked, but the drought last year hit the farmers hard. When they couldn't pay their accounts, we couldn't pay ours. West nodded, making notes in a small leather book. And Wells was quick to offer loans at rates no honest man could sustain. You sound like you've seen this before. I've seen a lot of things. He closed the ledger with a snap. We need supplies, quality goods at fair prices. People will pay for what they need, but they need to trust they're not being cheated. Trust is hard to come by these days. Then we'll earn it back, West said with a conviction that made her want to believe him. One fair deal at a time. As the day wore on, Katherine found herself watching her new partner when he wasn't looking. There was something about the way he moved, confident yet always aware of his surroundings. He spoke little of himself, deflecting her questions with questions of his own about the town, the people, the history of the store. By closing time, they had a plan. West would ride to Helena in 2 days to arrange new supply contracts. Katherine would clean and reorganize the store, making space for the new inventory. They would reopen in 2 weeks with fresh stock and renewed purpose. As Katherine locked the front door, she noticed Sheriff Miller making his way down the boardwalk toward them, his weathered face set in lines of concern. Miss Keller, he nodded politely before turning a more appraising eye on West. Heard you were back in town, Yancy. Sheriff, West acknowledged with a slight nod. Hiram Wells was mighty upset this morning. Upset men make mistakes, West replied evenly. Smart men learn to live with disappointment. Miller's mustache twitched. Just don't want any trouble in my town. Your town, is it now? West asked, his tone light but his eyes hard. Seems I remember when it was Judge Carson's town, then it was Mayor Flannery's. Now it's yours. Funny how that works. The sheriff's face darkened. Watch yourself, Yancy. Some folks around here have long memories. So do I, Sheriff, so do I. After Miller continued on his rounds, Katherine turned to West. You're going to tell me what that was about. West sighed, looking down the street as if seeing ghosts among the buildings. Another time, perhaps. No, Katherine insisted. If we're partners, I need to know what I'm getting into. Who you really are. For a long moment, West was silent, and Katherine thought he might simply walk away. Then he gestured toward the small apartment above the store. Got any coffee up there? This might take a while. In the modest living quarters that had been her home since childhood, Katherine prepared coffee on the small stove while West stood awkwardly by the window, looking down on the main street as twilight settled over Promise Creek. I grew up about 60 miles from here, he began as she handed him a cup. My father had a small ranch, nothing fancy, but it was ours. When I was 16, a hard winter killed most of our cattle. Dad took out a loan from Wells to rebuild the herd. Katherine sat at the small kitchen table, watching as West's face hardened with the memory. 3 bad years followed: drought, disease. By the time I was 19, Wells was foreclosing. My father. West's voice grew tight. He couldn't face losing everything. Put a gun to his head the night before the sheriff was coming. I'm sorry, Katherine whispered. I buried him on our land, then I rode away. West took a sip of coffee. Spent 5 years working cattle drives, saving every penny, then another 5 making investments that paid off. I came back to buy our land, but it was too late. Wells had sold it to the mining company. They stripped it bare. So you came here instead. For revenge, West's eyes met hers. I came to stop Wells from doing to others what he did to my family. Revenge is a luxury I can't afford. But you hate him. With every breath, West admitted. But hate won't rebuild what he's destroyed. Only good business will do that. Katherine considered his words. And our partnership, is that just a means to your end? It's a beginning, he corrected. Your father's store matters to this town. If we can make it thrive again, we prove there's another way besides selling your soul to Hiram Wells. You make it sound simple. Nothing worth doing ever is. West set down his cup. Get some rest, Miss Keller. Tomorrow will be a long day. As he moved toward the door, Katherine called after him. Where are you staying? Hotel for now. And after that, West paused, hand on the doorknob. Haven't thought that far ahead. But something in his eyes told Katherine he was lying. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Katherine arrived downstairs to find the front door unlocked and West already inside. His sleeves rolled up as he dismantled an old display case. You're early, she remarked, trying not to notice the way the morning light caught in his dark hair or how the muscles in his forearms flexed as he worked. Thought I'd get a head start, he replied without looking up. This place needs more work than I realized. For the next several hours, they worked side by side, emptying shelves, scrubbing floors, and rearranging the layout of the store. West proved to be as methodical in manual labor as he was in business matters, working efficiently and with purpose. Where did you learn all this? Katherine asked as she watched him repair a broken shelf with skilled hands. Life, he answered simply. When you've had to rebuild from nothing, you learn to be handy. By midday, several townsfolk had noticed the activity in the supposedly doomed store. Mrs. Abernathy, the widow who ran the boarding house, was the first to venture inside. Katherine Keller. I heard the most astonishing rumors this morning, she exclaimed, her curious eyes darting between Katherine and West. They're saying you've found a way to keep the store after all. News travels fast, Katherine replied with a smile. Mrs. Abernathy, this is my new business partner, Mr. Weston Yancy. West tipped his hat. Madam, Mrs. Abernathy's eyes widened in recognition. Yancy, not Joseph Yancey's boy. Yes, madam, Lord above, the widow breathed. I remember when you were knee-high to a grasshopper, your mother used to bring you into town on market days. Her expression softened. She was a good woman, your mother, the best, West agreed quietly. Well, Mrs. Abernathy said, looking around the store, it does my heart good to see Keller's getting a fresh start. Your father would be proud, Katherine. After the widow left, promising to spread word of the store's reopening, Katherine noticed West had grown quiet, his movements more measured. You didn't mention your mother, she said gently. Died of fever when I was 12, he replied without pausing in his work. Dad and I managed after that until we couldn't. Katherine wanted to ask more, but something in his posture warned against it. Instead, she said, I think we've earned a break. I could make sandwiches. West nodded, finally setting down his tools. That would be welcome. As they ate on the back steps of the store, looking out at the small garden Katherine's mother had planted years ago, now overgrown with weeds, a comfortable silence settled between them. We should clear that, West said eventually, nodding toward the garden. Good soil like that shouldn't go to waste. I've never had much luck with growing things, Katherine admitted. I could help. My mother kept a garden, taught me a thing or two. The offer surprised her. You planning to stay that long? West met her eyes. Aren't you the one who insisted on a 2-year partnership agreement? Yes, but I assumed you'd be less involved once things were running. That's not how partnerships work, Miss Keller. Katherine, she corrected. If we're going to be working together for 2 years, I think you can use my given name. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Katherine, then. The way he said it, slow and deliberate, made her cheeks warm in a way that had nothing to do with the midday sun. The moment was broken by the arrival of Hiram Wells himself, his expensive suit and gold watch chain marking him as a man of means even to those who didn't know his reputation. He stood in the back doorway, casting a long shadow over them both. "Miss Keller," he said, ignoring West entirely. "I wanted to see for myself what all the excitement was about. Quite the town hero already, aren't you? Saving your father's pathetic little shop." Katherine rose to her feet, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Mr. Wells, I wasn't aware the bank made house calls, only in special circumstances." Wells's cold eyes finally shifted to West. "I underestimated you, Yancy. I didn't think you had the funds for such charitable endeavors." West stood slowly, his stance casual but his eyes alert. "Not charity, Wells. Investment, something you'd understand if you weren't so busy squeezing folks dry." Wells chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Such righteous indignation. Tell me, does Miss Keller know why you're really here? What happened the last time you were in Promise Creek?" "I know enough," Katherine interjected. "If you've come to threaten us, threaten." "My dear, I'm simply making a social call." Wells adjusted his expensive cufflinks and offering some friendly advice. "Mr. Yancy has a history in these parts, one that might make a respectable businesswoman think twice about associating with him." "Is that all?" West asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "For now," Wells smiled thinly. "Enjoy your partnership while it lasts." With a tip of his hat to Katherine, he turned and left the way he had come. When he was gone, Katherine turned to West. "What was he talking about?" "What happened the last time you were here?" West's jaw tightened. "It's not important." It seemed important to him. "Wells uses anything he can as a weapon. Don't give him the satisfaction." "That's not an answer," Katherine pressed. West ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. 10 years ago, I came back to settle a score with Wells. It went badly. I ended up in a fight with his hired men. One of them died." Katherine felt her blood run cold. "You killed someone?" "No," West said firmly. "But I was there. Sheriff Miller, Deputy Miller back then wanted to charge me with murder. Judge Carson knew it was self-defense and dismissed the case, but the damage was done. I left town with a bad reputation and no justice. And now you're back." "Now I'm back," he agreed. "Older, wiser. With a different plan." Katherine studied him, trying to reconcile this new information with the man she was beginning to know. "Is that really all there is to it?" Something flickered in West's eyes, regret perhaps, or a deeper pain. "That's all that matters now." Before she could argue, the church bell began to toll urgently, the town's signal for fire. They both ran to the front of the store to see smoke rising from the direction of the livery stable. "Stay here," West ordered, already moving toward the commotion. "Like hell I will," Katherine retorted, grabbing a bucket and following him into the street, where a line of townspeople was already forming to pass water from the well to the growing blaze. The fire had started in the hayloft and was spreading quickly through the wooden structure. Horses screamed in terror as men worked frantically to free them from their stalls. Without hesitation, West plunged into the smoke-filled building alongside several other men. Katherine joined the water line, passing buckets with burning arms but unwavering determination. For nearly an hour, the town fought the blaze. When it was finally contained, the stable was badly damaged but still standing. No lives had been lost, human or animal, though several men emerged with burns and smoke-blackened faces. West was among the last to exit the building, supporting Gus Turner, the elderly stable hand who was coughing violently. Katherine rushed forward with a dipper of water. "Slow sips," she instructed Gus as West eased him onto a barrel. "You're hurt," she said to West, noticing the angry red burn on his forearm where his rolled-up sleeve had failed to protect him. "It's nothing," he dismissed, but winced when she gently touched the skin around the injury. "It's not nothing. Come back to the store. I have salve." Back in her living quarters, Katherine cleaned the burn with cool water before applying a healing ointment her mother had taught her to make from beeswax and herbs. "You didn't have to go in there," she said quietly as she wrapped clean linen around his arm. "Yes, I did." "Why?" "To prove something," West shook his head, "because it was the right thing to do. Katherine finished the bandage, her fingers lingering perhaps longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said, "for helping today." "I didn't do it for thanks, I know." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them seemed charged with unspoken words. "That's why I'm grateful." After the fire, something shifted between them. The tentative partnership began to feel more like friendship as they settled into a routine of working together to revitalize the store. West rode to Helena as planned and returned with contracts for supplies at prices that made Catherine's eyes widen in disbelief. "How did you manage this?" she asked, reviewing the paperwork. "Turns out I'm not the only one with a grudge against Hiram Wells," West replied with a hint of satisfaction. "These suppliers have been looking for a way into Promise Creek for years, but Wells's influence kept them out." The day they reopened Keller's Mercantile, a steady stream of curious customers filled the store from morning until dusk. Katherine was surprised to see many faces she hadn't noticed in months: farmers from the outlying homesteads, miners from the hills, even travelers passing through who had heard about the fresh inventory and fair prices. By closing time, the cash box was fuller than it had been in years, and Katherine felt a knot of tension she'd carried for months finally begin to loosen. "We did it," she said to West as they counted the day's earnings. "Day one," he reminded her, but there was pride in his voice. Still a long road ahead. As summer ripened into fall, the store flourished. West proved to be not just a silent partner but an active participant in every aspect of the business. He knew when to defer to Catherine's experience and when to offer new ideas. Together, they expanded their inventory, added a small lending library in the back corner, and even began taking special orders for items they didn't regularly stock. Katherine watched as West gradually gained acceptance in town. His willingness to help anyone in need, his fair dealings, and his quiet competence slowly overcame the whispers about his past. Even Sheriff Miller had begrudgingly nodded to him on the street last week, a small gesture, but significant. Only Hiram Wells remained coldly hostile, though he'd made no overt moves against them since his visit that first day. Still, Katherine often caught sight of him watching the store from across the street, his expression calculating. "He's waiting for us to fail," she commented to West one evening as they closed up. "Then he'll be waiting a long time," West replied confidently. "We're doing too well for him to touch us now." It was true. The store had become a gathering place for the town, and Katherine found herself at the center of a community that had seemed ready to abandon her just months ago. She had West to thank for that, though he deflected her gratitude every time she tried to express it. As fall deepened, bringing with it colder nights and the promise of winter, Katherine became aware of another change one within herself. She found her thoughts turning to West at odd moments throughout the day, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. How he always seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. The quiet strength that radiated from him without dominating. She told herself it was natural they were spending nearly every waking hour together. But when their hands brushed as they worked and her heart quickened, she knew it was more than mere familiarity. One crisp October morning, Katherine arrived downstairs to find West had already lit the stove and brewed coffee. She accepted the cup he offered with a smile that faltered when she saw his serious expression. "What is it? What's wrong?" West handed her a folded paper. This was slipped under the door sometime during the night. Katherine unfolded it to find a roughly drawn picture of a burning building with the words "Leave while you can" scrawled beneath. "Wells?" she asked, her mouth suddenly dry. "Possibly, or someone working for him." West took the paper back, his jaw tight. "I'm going to start sleeping in the storeroom. You think they'd actually try to burn us out? I think someone wants us scared enough to give up." West's eyes met hers. "Are you scared?" "Yes," she admitted. "Ready to give up, not a chance." The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That's what I hoped you'd say." That night, Katherine lay awake in her bed, acutely aware that West was just one floor below, keeping watch. The thought was both comforting and unsettling in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. When a soft knock came at her door near midnight, she was still wide awake. "Katherine." West's voice was barely audible. "There's someone at the back door." She pulled on her robe and followed him downstairs, where he handed her his spare revolver before positioning himself beside the door. "Who's there?" he called. "Tommy Jenkins, sir. I got information." West looked at Katherine, who nodded in recognition of the name. Tommy was a young man who worked odd jobs around town, simple-minded but honest. West opened the door cautiously to reveal a nervous-looking youth of about 20, twisting his cap in his hands. "Mr. Yancy, sir. Miss Keller. I heard some men talking behind the saloon tonight." Tommy glanced over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. "They was saying how the store would have an accident tomorrow night, how it would be a shame if you was both inside when it happened." Katherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Who were these men, Tommy?" "Don't know their names, madam. One was that feller who rides with Mr. Wells sometimes, the big one with the scar on his chin." "Jed Carter," West muttered. "Wells's enforcer. They gave me this to keep quiet." Tommy produced a silver dollar. "But my ma says you've been good to us, letting her pay her account when she can. Didn't seem right not to warn you." West put a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You did the right thing, Tommy, thank you." After sending Tommy home with an extra $1 for his trouble and instructions to tell no one about his visit, West turned to Katherine, his expression grim. "We need a plan." "We need the sheriff," Katherine countered. "Miller won't move against Wells without proof." "Then we'll get proof." Katherine's mind raced ahead. "If they're planning something tomorrow night, we'll be ready." They stayed up until dawn, planning their defense. By the time the store opened the next morning, they had a strategy that made Katherine's stomach tight with fear but her resolve firm. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Katherine served customers with a smile that felt brittle on her face, all the while watching the clock and the street outside. West was similarly tense, though he hid it better. As evening approached, they enacted the first part of their plan. Katherine closed the store at the usual time, making sure several townspeople saw her and West both still inside, lighting lamps as if preparing for a late night of inventory. Then, under cover of darkness, they slipped out the back door and made their way to the sheriff's office, where Miller listened to their story with obvious skepticism. "You expect me to stake out your store on the word of simple Tommy Jenkins?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "We expect you to protect citizens of this town from criminal threats," West replied evenly. "Unless you have a reason not to." Miller's eyes narrowed at the implication. "Watch yourself, Yancy. Making accusations against a respected businessman like Mr. Wells is dangerous ground." "So is ignoring a potential arson attempt," Katherine interjected. "What if they burn more than just our store? Half the buildings on that street share walls." That gave Miller pause. Finally, he sighed and reached for his hat. "I'll post up across the street. But if nothing happens, you two owe me a night's sleep." They returned to the store by a roundabout route, entering through the cellar doors West had recently repaired. From the darkness of the second floor, they watched and waited, the sheriff barely visible in the shadows of the hardware store across the street. Minutes stretched into hours. Katherine found herself nodding off, her head drooping toward West's shoulder as they sat side by side at her small window. "Rest," he whispered. "I'll wake you if anything happens." She meant to refuse, but exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep with her head pillowed against West's solid warmth. The sound of breaking glass jerked her awake. West was already on his feet, peering down into the darkened street. "Two men," he whispered. "Back door." They crept downstairs in time to hear the soft scraping of the back door being forced. The smell of kerosene reached them before they saw the intruders' two figures moving silently through the store, one carrying a small barrel, the other a torch not yet lit. West nodded to Katherine, who moved to the prearranged position by the front window. At his signal, she threw open the shutters and fired a shot into the air, the agreed-upon signal to Miller. Chaos erupted. The intruders cursed, dropping the barrel with a heavy thud. West lit a lamp, illuminating the scene as Sheriff Miller burst through the front door, gun drawn. "Don't move." Miller shouted, but one of the men, Jed Carter, just as Tommy had said, was already diving for the back door. The other froze in the lamplight, his face pale with fear. It was just a job. the man stammered as Miller approached. Carter said it was just to scare them out. I didn't know, save it for the judge. Miller cut him off, securing the man's wrists with handcuffs before turning to West and Katherine. Carter got away. You two all right? Katherine nodded, her hands still shaking as she lowered the revolver. We're fine. You got lucky, Miller said, examining the barrel of kerosene. This would have taken out half the block. Not luck, West replied. Preparation. As Miller led the captured arsonist away, promising to send deputies to search for Carter, Katherine sagged against the counter, the night's tension finally catching up with her. You were right, she said to West. Wells was willing to burn us out. But he failed, West reminded her, his hand finding hers in the dim light. And now we have proof of what he's capable of. Katherine looked down at their joined hands, at West's strong fingers intertwined with hers, and felt something shift inside her, a certainty taking root where doubt had lived for too long. What happens now? She asked. West's thumb traced small circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. Now we finish what we started. The attempted arson became the talk of Promise Creek. By noon the next day, everyone had heard how Keller's mercantile had narrowly escaped destruction, and how the captured arsonist had implicated Jed Carter, though he claimed no knowledge of Hiram Wells's involvement. Carter himself had disappeared, his horse missing from the livery stable. Sheriff Miller organized a search party, but it was half-hearted at best. Everyone knew Carter wouldn't be found unless he wanted to be. For Katherine and West, the failed attack brought unexpected benefits. Townspeople rallied around them, offering support and increased business. More significantly, several farmers who had been reluctant to cross Wells openly now brought their trade to the store, telling stories of the banker's predatory practices that echoed West's own experience. We've become a symbol, Katherine remarked one afternoon as they restocked shelves together. People who have been afraid to stand up to Wells now see it's possible. That's what he fears most, West agreed. Not just us succeeding, but others following our example. The winter arrived early that year, bringing heavy snow by mid-November. Despite the cold, the store remained busy, and Katherine found herself happier than she could remember being since before her father's death. Much of that happiness, she knew, was due to West. Their partnership had evolved into something neither of them spoke about, but both felt a deeper connection that manifested in lingering glances, casual touches that weren't entirely casual, and conversations that stretched late into the night. Yet something held them both back from acknowledging what was growing between them. For Katherine, it was the fear of risking a business arrangement that had saved her livelihood. For West, she suspected it was something more complex, tied to his past and his unfinished business with Hiram Wells. As Christmas approached, Katherine decorated the store with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. West surprised her by carving small wooden ornaments to hang from the ceiling, stars and angels that spun gently in the draft from the door. Where did you learn to carve like this? She asked, admiring the delicate detail of an angel's wings. Long nights on the trail, he replied. A man needs something to do with his hands besides play cards. On Christmas Eve, they closed the store early. Snow was falling again, transforming Promise Creek into a gingerbread village dusted with sugar. Katherine had prepared a special dinner in her apartment and invited West to join her, something they'd never done despite all the meals they'd shared in the back room or on the steps. He arrived with a bottle of good whiskey and a small package wrapped in brown paper. Katherine had set her table with her mother's china and the silver candlesticks that only came out for special occasions. The apartment smelled of roasted chicken, cinnamon, and pine from the small tree she'd placed in the corner. Merry Christmas, she said, taking his coat and hat. This is nice, West replied, looking around at the transformed space with an expression that made Katherine's heart beat faster. They ate by candlelight, sharing stories of childhood Christmases. West spoke more freely than usual about his mother, about the traditions she had maintained even on their remote ranch, and Katherine found herself falling deeper under the spell of this complex man who had changed her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. After dinner, they moved to the small sofa near the stove. West refilled their glasses and handed Katherine the package he'd brought. "It isn't much," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice that she'd never heard before. Katherine unwrapped the paper to find a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she saw blank pages with a single inscription on the first page in West's neat handwriting. "For new beginnings." "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you." She reached under the sofa and produced her own gift, a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "I made it match your eyes," she admitted, feeling suddenly shy. "Though I'm not the best knitter." West ran his fingers over the uneven stitches with a tenderness that made her throat tight. "No one's made me anything in, I can't remember how long." "Well, get used to it," Katherine said, attempting lightness. "Partners look out for each other." West looked up from the scarf, his eyes intent on hers. "Is that all we are, Katherine, partners?" The question hung between them, laden with possibilities. Katherine's heart hammered in her chest as she searched for the right words. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I know you came here with a purpose that had nothing to do with me. I know you have unfinished business with Wells. I wonder sometimes if once that's done, you'll move on." West set his glass down and moved closer on the sofa. "Do you want me to stay? Beyond our agreement?" "Yes," she whispered, the admission both frightening and freeing. "But not if your heart is set on revenge, not if that's more important to you than what we could have. Katherine." Her name on his lips was like a caress. "When I came back to Promise Creek, revenge was all I thought about. Now I think about the store, about the future, about you." His hand came up to cup her cheek, and Katherine leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "Wells took everything from me once," West continued. "I won't let him or anyone else do it again, but that's not the same as revenge. It's protection. It's building something worth fighting for." When his lips met hers, it felt like the culmination of a journey that had begun that stormy night months ago. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Katherine's arms went around his neck, pulling him closer. When they finally parted, breathless, West rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for months," he confessed. "What took you so long?" she asked, smiling. "I needed to be sure you weren't just grateful to the man who saved your store." Katherine laughed softly. "West, you didn't save the store. We did. Together." He kissed her again, and outside the snow continued to fall, covering Promise Creek in a blanket of peaceful white. The new year brought challenges they hadn't anticipated. January's bitter cold froze pipes and made deliveries difficult. February saw an influenza outbreak that left Katherine working the store alone for a week, while West recovered in her apartment, stubborn and restless as any patient she'd ever tended. But with each obstacle overcome, their bond strengthened. By spring, it was common knowledge in Promise Creek that Miss Keller and Mr. Yancy were more than just business partners, though they maintained a proper public demeanor that satisfied all but the most gossipy townsfolk. As the weather warmed, they expanded the store again, adding a section for gardening supplies and seeds. West cleared Katherine's overgrown garden and planted vegetables, showing her the techniques his mother had taught him years ago. In the evenings, they would sit on the back steps, watching their handiwork grow in neat rows, planning for the future in ways that increasingly included words like we and our and always. Only one shadow remained: Hiram Wells. The banker had been conspicuously silent since the arson attempt, though his influence in town remained strong. Jed Carter had never been found, and the captured arsonist had received a light sentence after mysteriously changing his testimony about Carter's involvement. "He's waiting," West said one evening as they watched Wells enter his bank across the street. "Planning something we haven't anticipated. Or perhaps he's decided we're not worth the trouble," Katherine suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. Men like Wells don't admit defeat. They just change tactics. West's prediction proved accurate sooner than either of them expected. The following week, a letter arrived from the territorial tax assessor's office, stating that Keller's mercantile owed 3 years of back taxes, plus penalties, an amount that would wipe out most of their carefully accumulated savings. "This is ridiculous," Katherine fumed, reading the letter for the third time. "Father was meticulous about taxes. I have the receipts somewhere. Find them. West advised. "This has Wells's fingerprints all over it." Katherine spent hours searching through her father's papers, finally locating the tax receipts in a metal box at the bottom of her wardrobe. They were exactly as she'd remembered proof of payment for every year except the current one, which wasn't yet due. Armed with the evidence, West rode to the county seat to confront the tax assessor. He returned 2 days later, his expression thunderous. "The assessor claims our receipts are forgeries," he reported. "Says the official records show no payments for 3 years. He's given us 30 days to pay or face seizure of property." "That's impossible," Katherine protested. "Those records can't just disappear. They can if someone has enough influence or enough money." West paced the length of the store. "Wells must have someone in the assessor's office." "What do? We can pay it, but it would leave us vulnerable." Which is exactly what he wants. West stopped pacing, his decision made. "I'm going to Helena. The territorial governor owes me a favor." "A favor?" Katherine raised her eyebrows. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that comes from saving his son from a bad gambling debt in Cheyenne." West's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I told you I've been busy these last 10 years. He left the next morning, promising to return within the week. Katherine watched him ride away, already missing his steady presence but confident in his ability to resolve this latest threat. 3 days later, as she was closing the store, Sheriff Miller appeared at her door with a grave expression. "Miss Keller, there's been an incident on the Helena Road." Katherine's blood ran cold. "West, is he?" "He's alive," Miller assured her quickly, "but he's been shot. They're bringing him in now." The next hours passed in a blur. West was carried into Doc Wilson's surgery with a bullet wound in his shoulder and another graze along his ribs. He'd been found by a passing freight wagon, his horse shot dead beneath him, his saddlebags missing. "Ambush," he muttered when he was finally conscious enough to speak to Katherine. "2 men, didn't see their faces." "Robbery?" Sheriff Miller asked, standing at the foot of the bed. West's eyes, clouded with pain and laudanum, found Katherine's. "The papers, governor's letter, gone," Katherine understood immediately. "This wasn't random, Sheriff. Someone knew exactly what he was carrying and why," Miller frowned. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Keller." "It's the truth," she replied, her fear giving way to anger. "Hiram Wells is behind this, just like he was behind the arson attempt and the false tax claim. You can't prove that." "Not yet," she agreed, "but I will." For 3 days, Katherine barely left West's side as he battled fever and pain. Doc Wilson was concerned about infection, but eventually pronounced the wounds clean and healing. By the 4th day, West was sitting up, chafing at his confinement and insisting on returning to the store. "You're not going anywhere," Katherine told him firmly. "Doc Wilson says at least another week of rest." "We don't have a week," West argued. "The tax deadline is still 3 weeks away, and I've been thinking." Katherine sat on the edge of his bed, taking his hand in hers. "Wells has been 1 step ahead of us because he knows what we're doing. But what if we did something he couldn't possibly anticipate?" West studied her face. "You have a plan." "I do," she confirmed, "but you're not going to like it." She was right, he didn't like it. West argued vehemently against Katherine confronting Wells directly, but in the end, his weakened condition and her determination won out. The next morning, Katherine dressed in her best skirt and jacket, pinned up her hair in a severe style, and crossed the street to the Promise Creek Bank. Hiram Wells's secretary tried to turn her away, claiming the banker was in a meeting, but Katherine simply seated herself in the waiting area and announced she would stay until he could see her, even if it took all day. An hour later, she was shown into Wells's opulent office. The banker sat behind a massive oak desk, his expression one of carefully cultivated concern. "Miss Keller, what a pleasant surprise. I was so distressed to hear about Mr. Yancy's unfortunate accident." "It was no accident," Katherine replied, remaining standing despite his gesture toward a chair. "Just as the tax assessment was no accident, or the attempt to burn our store, or the disappearance of Jed Carter after he failed." Wells's pleasant mask didn't slip. "These are serious accusations, my dear, especially without a shred of evidence." "I don't need evidence for what I'm about to propose." Katherine stepped closer to the desk. "I want to make a deal." Now she had his attention. Wells leaned forward slightly. "What kind of deal?" You withdraw the tax claim. You leave our store alone, no more accidents, no more threats. In exchange, we stop looking into your past business practices. We focus on our store and nothing else." Wells chuckled. "And why would I need such an arrangement? I'm a respected businessman with nothing to hide." Katherine placed her hands on his desk, leaning forward. "Because Weston Yancy isn't the only one who's been gathering information these past 10 years. He has friends in places you wouldn't expect, people who owe him favors, people who have been waiting for the right moment to speak out against you." It was a bluff, based on fragments of information West had let slip over the months, but Katherine delivered it with such conviction that doubt flickered across Wells's face. "Even if that were true," he said carefully, "what's to stop me from simply eliminating the problem permanently? Your partner's condition proves he's not invulnerable." "Because I've taken precautions," Katherine replied, her heart racing despite her calm exterior. "Letters have been sent to several territorial officials to be opened only in the event of harm coming to either of us. The contents would interest not only the banking commission, but the federal marshal's office." This, too, was a bluff, but one she'd made real just that morning, posting letters to the governor and the territorial marshal that contained what little concrete evidence they had against Wells, with instructions they be opened only if she or West met with foul play. Wells was silent for a long moment, studying her with new eyes. "You've changed, Miss Keller. There was a time when you would have sold that store for a pittance just to be free of debt." "Yes," she agreed. "I've learned what I'm worth, what we're worth." Another silence stretched between them before Wells leaned back in his chair. "Very well. I'll withdraw the tax claim. Your store can continue its modest success. But understand, this Promise Creek is still my town. Cross me again, and no amount of letters or friends will save you." "Is that a threat, Mr. Wells? Consider it a mutual understanding." He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Good day, Miss Keller." Katherine left the bank with shaking legs but a straight back, aware of curious eyes following her progress back to the store. Only when she was safely inside did she allow herself to collapse into a chair, her heart pounding with the audacity of what she'd just done. When she told West what had transpired, his initial anger at her risk-taking gave way to reluctant admiration. "You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever known," he said, pulling her into a careful embrace, mindful of his injured shoulder. "Probably both." "I learned from the best," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "Besides, I couldn't let him win, not after everything." "He'll find another way to come after us," West warned. "Maybe, but now he knows we're not easy targets." She looked up at him, suddenly serious. "West, I meant what I said about focusing on the store, on us. I don't want to spend our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next attack." West's hand came up to stroke her hair. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to let go of the past, both of us." She took a deep breath. "We've built something good here, something worth protecting, but I want to build a future too, not just defend against old enemies." For a long moment, West was silent, his eyes searching hers. "You're right," he finally said. "Wells took enough from me, from both of us. I won't let him take any more." Katherine felt as though a weight had lifted from her shoulders. "So we focus on the store, on us." West's smile was slow and sure. "On us," he agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss. True to his word, Hiram Wells withdrew the tax claim. The official explanation was a clerical error that had been discovered upon review. Katherine and West accepted the fiction publicly while remaining vigilant privately. As spring blossomed into summer, their business continued to thrive. The garden produced abundantly, providing fresh vegetables for their table and extras to sell in the store. West's shoulder healed completely, though it troubled him in damp weather, a reminder, he said, to never underestimate an opponent. In July, when the wildflowers carpeted the hills around Promise Creek in a riot of color, West took Katherine riding to a spot overlooking the valley. There, with the town spread out below them and the mountains stretching to the horizon, he asked her to be his wife. "I came back to Promise Creek looking for justice," he said as they sat together on a sun-warmed rock. "Instead, I found you, found us, found a future I never thought I'd have." Catherine's eyes filled with happy tears as she accepted his proposal and the simple gold band he'd carried in his pocket. "I was so afraid you'd never ask," she confessed. "That maybe you weren't ready." "I wasn't," he admitted. "Not until I realized that loving you was braver than hating Wells. That building a life with you was more important than settling old scores." They were married in September, with half the town in attendance. Even Sheriff Miller offered gruff congratulations, acknowledging that his initial judgment of West had been hasty. Hiram Wells was conspicuously absent, though his wife sent a silver serving dish with a polite note. That winter, they expanded again, purchasing the vacant building next door to create a proper home adjoining the store. Katherine discovered she was expecting their first child, and West's joy was boundless as he crafted a cradle from cherry wood, working late into the night by lamplight. "What shall we name him?" West asked one evening as they sat before the fire, his hand resting on her growing belly. "Him." "So certain it's a boy," Katherine teased. "Just a feeling," he replied with a smile. "A son to teach the business someday, and if it's a daughter, then she'll be as smart and stubborn as her mother and twice as beautiful." Katherine laid her hand over his. "I was thinking Joseph for a boy after your father, or Mary for a girl after my mother." The emotion that crossed West's face made her heart swell. "I'd like that," he said softly. In April of 1878, Mary Katherine Yancy arrived with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. West held his daughter with trembling hands, overwhelmed by love for this tiny new life and for the woman who had given her to him. As Promise Creek grew with the coming of the railroad which, as West had predicted, brought prosperity to those prepared for it, Keller's Mercantile, now Keller and Yancey's, grew as well. They added a second floor to the store, hired assistants, and became known throughout the territory for fair prices and honest dealing. Hiram Wells remained a power in town, but a diminished one. Other businesses followed the example set by Katherine and West, refusing to be intimidated or bought out. The banker eventually focused his attention on Helena, where larger opportunities awaited, though he maintained his home and bank in Promise Creek. On the 5th anniversary of their partnership, Katherine and West closed the store early and climbed the hill where he had proposed. Their daughter, now a spirited toddler, ran ahead of them, chasing butterflies through the grass. "Did you ever imagine this?" Katherine asked, taking West's hand as they watched Mary playing. "When you rode into town that night, not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "I was so focused on what I'd lost that I couldn't see what might be gained." "And now," West pulled her close, his arms strong around her waist. "Now I know what real worth is." Katherine smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "So do I." Below them, Promise Creek basked in the afternoon sun, the future stretching out as vast and hopeful as the Montana sky above.